All
Got
right,
it.
here we are, buddy. How are you? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Anthony Coscia. I'm a luthier in Southbury, Connecticut, and creator of the Petite Mur de Son or Petite Mur de Son. I had to change the name because I didn't do my French right the first time.
Is that French for mini wall?
Yeah, for I guess it technically is probably small wall of sound, but apparently the when I first did it, petite with an E is feminine and wall mur is masculine. And I got a bunch of people from Canada and France that were calling me out on it. So I finally changed it yesterday.
It's so great to have you on the Grail. I've been obsessed with the wall of sound since the first time I really saw it. I would say it would be in all the Day on the Green photos when they were running at the Oakland Coliseum that time. I know they were using it way before that, like the Cow Palace starting back in '74, but that was really when I saw the grand scale of it. Just looking at this incredible, and I think it was Grateful Dead, The Who. Is that correct? Do you know?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, the wall was really only used for that short period of time, at least in the full scale in '74, and then after that, it was just kind of dismantled.
Yeah,
So I don't.
I remember seeing just photos of it and being like, wow, what is that? It just looked like something out of a movie, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
Quadrophenia or something, just like bam, big stereo.
yeah, yeah. Oh, there was certainly nothing like it before that, and even by today's standards, I mean, it's just nothing's really rivaled it in just terms of appearance and massive scale.
It's really amazing when you think about these hippies, and which I loved. I grew up in the Bay Area, so you've got Mesa Boogie, you got Alembic, you
Oh,
have all these Mill Valley rich hippies looking to spend money on home stereos with Macintoshes and blah punks in the BMWs with the rubber knobs. Like, oh, you got a blah punk, you know?
I remember.
Yeah, and there was even one blow punk that was had like a joystick, and it was like mounted next to your shifter, and you could pull it closer to you and everything. I mean, hi-fi and audio in the '70s was really igniting, man, in
Yeah,
that mid '70s. And then here comes, Stanley, and like, he's fresh out of prison. He's like, I want to build a PA. And he builds this fucking insane PA.
yep. And it's, what to me is the greatest part about it is there was no purpose other than to make it the best thing it could be. There was no real monetary value in that day for them to be doing this. It certainly, almost bankrupted them, but they did it anyway. Why not?
That's what I love about the Dead. They're like, yeah, man, let's give it a go. And when you
Yeah.
look at the Dead over the years, they've always been pretty adventurous, being with
Yep.
playing boutique builders guitars,
Yep.
and even Bobby starting to get into those graphite, the pink
The
guitars
modular stuff and
yeah,
everything.
all that stuff. And their amps would change over the
Yep.
years all the time. It's really wild. It was fun to watch because you're looking at them, especially if you watch the documentary, just the change of from just your Fender amp and an SG to
Right.
all of a sudden like just full on experimenting with instruments as
Right.
much as the music.
And even what you saw that would have been a Fender twin head or something like that, none of it was really what you were looking at. I mean, all this stuff was highly, modified to really suit their needs. And I mean, the community of guys out there and gals that do nothing but study, dead gear is ridiculously large. And I'm guilty. I'm part of that. It's just, it's a never ending, like people chase tone. People who chase Jerry tone are, take it to a whole new level.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I really think John Mayer has really mastered the great sound of having his own sound and giving
Yep.
ode to Jerry, which is great because a lot of people they'll just get like the they
Yeah.
just get the they
They'll take any envelope filter or Ottawa and they think that they've got it. And,
yeah,
it
no,
doesn't.
they're like, here comes Jerry now. Tiny bubbles flying everywhere. But there has been guys over the years like Kimmock that have really understood what
Right.
the sound was. And, me being around that Mesa Boogie factory, in the early days. My buddy
Yep.
Steve worked there, and I was always in there with Doug West and all these guys. I understood that all these people were always chasing for the ultimate tone, the
Yep.
ultimate sound, the tube sound. And we got great stuff from it, including this wall of sound. So let's
Yep.
get into it. How do you first get into the Dead and the wall of sound? And then what was your research to get into it? Because we got Macintosh involved, right? And then what were the speakers?
So the speakers were all either JBLs or EVs. Most of the instrument speakers, I think, were all on the JBL side. All the amps were Macintoshes, and they were a mix of solid state, the 2300s, and I think the MC 350s, the tube ones they were using for vocals because they were, I guess, warmer. But my intro to the Dead wasn't until 88 or so. And, to say I was a fan of the Wall then, I'd be lying because, we didn't have the internet. We saw a picture here and there and we knew that that existed, but, it wasn't until more recently that you could really see all this info. And for me, it was the Grateful Dead movie. It was like that 20-second snippet of Phil geeking out with Osiris with his, quad bass and just, looking up and like in wonder at the speakers and like, oh, this is coming from here. This is coming from here. And that got me hooked on the wall sound. And then kind of went from there.
It's amazing when you read like Kreitzman's book or anybody that was around the wall of sound. It was an absolute nightmare, which makes it even cooler because they knew like this thing's terrible. It needs two setups. The crew wasn't sleeping. They
Right.
would tear it down and get in trucks, totally dangerous, drive
Yep.
across America, half awake, gotta go get this thing set up. They're flying scaffolding, no sleep, maybe a
Right.
little party favors to keep it
Yeah.
going.
That's how you
And
keep it going.
yeah, and the audience is just getting this crazy sound. Now, Bill and some of the people said it was good, but the singing was the bummer part about it
Yeah.
because you had the two mics
Yeah.
and it was doing the reverse directional thing.
Yeah, I think that was probably a function of what the mic technology was back in the day than anything else. Certainly, I think by today's standards, you could make a much better, for at least for miking the singers, I think it would be vastly superior. But for back then, there was no real noise canceling technology out or anything like that. And that's funny because people hone in on that when I did that first wall and I had pictures of the mics and people were like, "Oh, I see you got the dual mics there," which were actually two humbucker screws
Yeah,
that I
wow.
that I that I dipped the ends in black paint, and people actually picked up on the black paint. And I say, "Oh, you got the foam windscreens on them," and like people geek out of the stuff. It's crazy.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, look, dude, I've done 611 episodes. And if I have some guitar builder on or an amplifier person, I'll get the same 10 people. Now you ought to have this guy on and that guy
Right?
on. And it's like, dude, it's not a guitar podcast. It's the same 10 people. And they're like, you know what you really ought to do is like,
Right.
yeah. But I mean, they do geek out. And there was a time where I was absolutely obsessed with gear, and I still am. I
Yeah.
love it. And I love reading about it. And I mostly love the people like yourself that dive into it, like a Mark Sampson when he was making the Matchless Boutique amps and stuff
Yeah.
like that. These guys have something in their brain that is like, must sound better, must
Right.
be the best, must be military spec, it must be bulletproof,
Right.
and I respect that drive and that nuttiness. So once
And I'm
you
I'm
yeah.
not the biggest expert on everything I do either. I mean, I'm a student of this as much as anybody. I just happen to be completely immersed in it now, but I learn stuff from people every single day, whether it's, some person out there may know one little tiny thing about the wall, but it's the one thing I didn't know, and that goes in the book, and it gets incorporated in, which I love. I love learning this stuff.
Now the microphones, the reason, let's let people know that they had these weird two setups of
The whole feedback.
yeah, the reverse polarity
Yeah.
was the PA is behind the band, which
Correct.
everybody knows when you go to a concert, it's on the left and right and kind
Yep.
of in front of them. So you don't get any kind of feedback,
Right.
but it's a weirder sound for the band on stage. They got to go with monitors, and in the last 20 years, in-ear monitors, which has really helped. But it was interesting. I did the Fillmore a couple years ago, opening for Rival Sons, and Bobby was there, and
Yeah.
he was like, "Yeah, I really like the Fillmore because you could kind of step a little further and hear the house, so it was like you were
Yeah.
in the crowd." And that is a really really vital thing if you played music like myself. There's nothing better than the house sound. You're just
Right.
out there, it's just rocking and full. So now the PA was behind the band. They had to have this special microphone set up so they wouldn't get feedback. But what I always wondered was, I never stood on stage for that. But now, if you stand on stage during a band, it's pretty quiet up there because it's either in ears or whatever.
Right.
But that, I wonder if that thing was just fucking
Uh,
crushing them.
well, I mean, it had to be crushing them because if you've ever stood in front of even one JBL when it's cranked, it's mind-boggling. But keep in mind, even though they had 600 speakers, the vast majority of them were going over their head. But they're
Right.
still standing in front of the first six at each stack,
Yeah.
and you have to think of this as being almost no different than when you show up at a small bar and you bring your little 1x12 and the bass player brings his little 4x10, and it's really the same thing, only Jerry's stack happened to be 20 speakers tall. But
Right.
it wasn't a PA in that sense, in that they all controlled their own instruments and their own amplifiers. There was no soundboard doing any of that, which is a great experiment. Ultimate control. I can imagine it could be a nightmare dialing it in.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but
Because if one guy's on the other side and he's like, I don't want to hear him at all tonight. It's just me all bass. Is it
right.
just getting just if you go to that side, is the crowd only getting the bass or is it stereo mix? Are they getting Jerry?
Well, bass was coming from both sides because
Got it.
Phil had stacks on both sides. Jerry was coming, I think, almost exclusively on the left. Bobby towards the left. Drums had stacks on both sides. Vocals had stacks all over the place. So I think probably if you were within the first 50 feet of the wall, you'd probably hear Jerry predominantly on the left.
Right.
But you go back to the back of the Winterland, 150, 200 feet back, it's probably, listen, we hear in stereo. So whether
Yeah.
there's 50 channels or two, you're hearing out of two.
Right.
But I think the fact that every channel had no intermodulation with every other, of the other instrument made it so that it was just crystal clear at the back of the room versus just kind of mud. And
Right.
I think, they had enough kind of speakers scattered around that weren't technically monitors, but they were like side fills. So that clearly, if Jerry needed to hear more Keith, there'd be a speaker somewhere that was angled a bit better. Otherwise, you'd be in trouble. You'd be hearing everything just off the back wall.
Yeah, it'd just be a nightmare. And also, I think what people don't know, and me being a singer, is it's really hard to sing in tune when it's super loud up on stage. So if you're
Right.
just getting blasted of instruments, and then and say the vocals are up higher
Yeah.
because they didn't have any wedges on the stage.
Oh,
It had to be really bizarre to sing. There's such a harmony band,
right.
two parts singing and three parts and all that. It had to be really hard to sing in tune. Also,
I mean, they had a couple arrays that had vocals mixed in on the left and right, but for the most part, I mean, you look at someone like Billy's playing drums, and all the vocals are mostly above his head or in front of him. So he had, I think, a couple 2x12s or something behind him just for vocals, because otherwise he'd be completely in the dark. But yeah, I would imagine that it took some real adjusting just to get used to, like, I mean, you show up at a bar with a three-piece band with three amps, kind of the same gig. You got to kind of dial each other in so you can hear.
right, right. Now, at what point? Oh, by the way, do you know? I don't remember, but I do think they talked about it in one of the books I've read or whatever. Do you remember what this thing cost in 1974?
I looked it up, and the number of like $275,000 comes to mind. Which then of course I look at that to see what that means today, and it comes out to about 1.2, 1.3 million, which is about what it would cost to recreate the wall today.
Right.
And I think if they were to do it again, there'd be a lot of things different. I love Macintosh, but I think they'd be going with all Class D amps. They'd be going with neodymium speakers. I mean, they'd be going with all these things that are easier to operate, transport. Um, you know,
Yeah.
those MCs were 128 pounds each, and they had 80 of them or something. I mean, just to wheel the
Wow.
amps in every gig would be just I mean, it's mind-boggling.
It really is mind-boggling. And not only that, but a lot of the guys weren't really what they would call pro technicians these days. They were
Yeah.
just kind of cool hippies that were like, dude, I'm on tour with the dead,
Yeah. I mean,
and
you had 3 guys in particular that were truly ideal for this. I mean, you had Ron Wickersham, you had Rick Turner, and then you had Bear. And those 3 guys were truly geniuses at this stuff. But beyond that, everyone else was just, really following along and then using almost like street smarts to make all this stuff work. And that I think is as fascinating to me as the actual sound and the technology is the fact that like the most disorganized, dysfunctional family on the planet pulled this off on such a huge scale for as long as they did. And I can't even imagine how you could organize that, you know, with
not only
everything that goes on.
not only that, but I am obsessed with design and architecture and everything.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It
Yeah.
is beautiful. And I have seen bands even later in the 80s. Van Halen definitely ripped
Yeah.
off the Wall of Sound look on like the Fair Warning tour with stacked
Yep.
cabinets all over and everything. That's definitely a complete ode to the Wall of Sound without maybe
Yep.
saying it. But
Right.
Dave was probably like, look at that, man. How can we make a monster PA looking
Right.
stage, you know?
Go look at there's videos out there of like the setup for like a Ramstein concert in Germany or something. And it's like a 7-day process that's 14 stories tall. And it's crazy. And it's that same kind of madness, different application. But I mean, I love that stuff.
Yeah. Now, once they cruise the wall for a year or whatever, they go, this is out. It's costing us too much money, which, by the way, there were 2 walls, right? Some
There
say
was only one
three.
wall,
Oh, one
one
wall, but
wall,
3 scaffoldings.
2 sets of scaffolding.
Right,
It's
right.
funny, the stories they morph over the years, but Rick Turner had just confirmed that on another podcast, I think recently. And he was saying, yeah, just 2 sets of scaffolding that would leapfrog, and then one wall.
Yeah.
And that's they were doing that day in day out. I mean, that's you're done with the gig, you're loading out, and you're on the road, and then you're setting up. And I spoke to Richard Petchner, who was a roadie at the time, and he's a photographer also who took a lot of those iconic pictures of the wall. And
Wow.
he said that there were times, they wouldn't finish setting up sound checking until within a half hour of the show, and it was right to the down to the wire. And that's not a lot of room for for error.
That's another thing that's interesting that they kind of created was the leapfrogging of stages. I worked for the
Yeah,
Stones, and they've been known to tour with 3 stages.
yeah,
We're playing on one, tearing one down, setting the other one up. Unbelievable that people
yeah,
don't understand that. But while you're watching them in Chicago, they're setting up over in Boston or whatever, and tearing
right.
one down. It's really wild to
Oh,
think that bands cruise with 2 or 3 stages.
yeah, and they're setting up with huge boom trucks and things like that. You see how the wall was set up. I mean, the scaffolding. I don't want to say it was decorative, but none of those stacks of speakers, except for that center column, were held up by the scaffolding. They were stacked on each other, what like Lincoln logs,
Wow.
and I lifted up one at a time by guys, with come-alongs and things. I mean, it's that you would never be able to do that today. You would never get insured for it.
No, yeah, that thing fall on someone and just
Yeah.
destroy them.
Yeah. I mean,
God,
my little wall weighs just under half a ton, and it takes 2 guys 4 hours, 4.5 hours to set it up if everything goes right. And that's a big if.
man.
They had 15 guys having to do this thing, which weighed tens of tons, and do it every day. I mean, it's got to be like just a dysfunctional ballet that makes it happen.
Now, once they're done with it, they, I think recently, maybe, I don't know, in the last 10 years, or maybe it was way before that, I could be wrong, but they parted this thing out and kind of sold it. And people had them for like nightclub PAs. And
Yeah.
I remember I was somewhere and they're like, oh, it might have been at Terrapin. And they're like, oh, that's part of the Wall of Sound. Or I was like, wow,
Right.
really?
Remember they had 600 speakers, which was probably 200 or so cabinets, and so they scattered all over the place. And I think the only time I've heard of a substantial part of the wall being used again, I think was in, and I don't quote me on this completely, but I think in 1979 they did a benefit show, and they had the whole vocal cluster from the, the massive curved structure. And I think they pulled that out for one show, and I wish I could remember what show that was. But beyond that, there's never, after 1974, there was never another wall show. There was never anything close. But I think they kept and parted out parts of it and used it in, the 76, 77, but not the way it was.
Yeah. Somebody told me Kimmock had one of the speakers and he used to just sit on it. It was like his stool.
Yeah. Oh, I have a lot of guys that I know that have a speaker from the wall, and
Yeah.
they're all beat to shit, but they look, why wouldn't you want to, just have that in your living room,
Oh, I heard that. I mean, I would love to have the dual microphone set up
Yeah,
in my living room just on a stand as a piece of
right.
history, because me being a singer and growing up and loving different microphones and everything, I was always like, what the hell is that? It's like it's a box with two shit mics
Yeah,
and they're
right.
just like on them right there. They're so small
They're
and really
tiny.
weird. They're tiny.
Yep.
And it also reminded me of those old days when they recorded like Hendrix and stuff, live records where they had two 58s duct taped.
Yep.
That was funny. One for the truck, one for the PA. So
What's fascinating to me is, there's lots of soundboard tapes from 74,
I heard they're
and everyone,
terrible too.
and it's funny. They're better than a lot of the shows, but they're not really soundboards because there was no soundboard. So
Right.
my presumption is that they mic'd one speaker from every, array, and then had a mixing board off to the side that just recorded this stuff. But they're not actually soundboards. And even though they're great for 1974 recordings, when you play them back through like My Wall of Sound, they sound great until you throw in something like, a modern day recording, whether it's a cover band or the Dead or any of that, or Dead and Company. It's a whole different level of recording that existed then.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, well, also it's not the quad sound's not going to come off from a recording, whatever
Right.
you're doing, unless you had special quad recording equipment and all that. It's going to drop down to some kind of compressed weird stereo mix
Right.
or a weird mono mix. So yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because people say this to me all the time. They say, "You're going to be able to play multi-tracks through this thing," and I can do it now. I just have to buy a little bit more technology for it. But the reality is that the person out 20 feet away from this thing would not know that they were hearing a multi-track. Sure, there's gonna be no intermodulation, but it's all going to blend, and you're only going to hear it out of two ears anyway. So it's almost a little gimmicky. When you get into a bigger wall, and like we're starting the half scale soon, that's a full blown. You could put that in a 4,000 seat place, and there it'll be great because it'll be crystal clear, and that makes sense to do. But on the small scale, it was more of a proof of concept on a small scale of how the wall worked, and which works incredibly well.
So how do you okay, we're going to get into what you're doing here. So you built the mini sound
Yeah.
wall of sound. How do you start this? When do you start it? And what is it like? You just go, all right, I'm going to do this. It was an obsession, or what happens there?
It's something that I've always thought would be a cool thing to do, and a lot of people have thought this. But I also happen to make regular guitar extension speaker cabinets for a living as part of my, I make guitars and I make speaker cabinets. So, for me, it was at the tail end of a cabinet run where I had extra Baltic birch laying around. Like, I'll make this little mini center vocal column because it looks cool. And then, once you do that and you put cheap 88-cent speakers in it and you realize, oh, this doesn't sound so bad, and then you don't stop. And then by the time, I think I had only done maybe a quarter of that wall, which is really a toy by comparison to the current one. Then the Wall Street Journal picked it up and did this front page story on it. It's like, oh shit, now this thing's going somewhere. And now it's morphed into like half of what I do for a living, if not more, because it's like an animal that just, it's a beast. You just have to keep feeding it. So
So
yeah, the
that's
first
it.
one was basic, real basic clock radio speakers, cell phone speakers, class D amps, and that one sounded shockingly good for what it was.
And
The one
how big was that? Was it like a model or something?
Yeah, so that one was 1/6 scale. So, on its stage, it still stood, 8 feet tall by 10 feet wide,
Oh
and was
shit.
probably, 700 or 800 watts. The quarter scale, which is what I'm getting close to completing now, or
Is
I have
that
three.
behind you?
No, that's the vocal array from the quarter scale. So
Gotcha.
that weighs more than a Fender Twin, that one cabinet there. So this whole thing is on it again on its stage. It is about 15 feet wide by 10 feet tall and weighs about 700, 800 pounds. Handles anywhere from, at peak, it could go up to probably 12,000 watts. I think I keep it to around 6,000 watts. And it could fill up, it could fill up certainly a 500 or 800, person, arena or something, or, venue
Like a theater.
easily, easily. I mean, we set it up at the Telefunken soundstage, which is 50 feet by 50 feet with 30 feet ceilings. And at about 2/3 power, we were able to, run a band of 4 people through it and record, and it sounded amazing.
Wow. You know what I'd like to do? A comedy special with that thing flown like behind me, like the wall of sound comedy, dude, just for the fucking look and the cool sound. People would be like, what is that? How cool would that be? A comedy special with the wall of sound.
Right. And and when I started this, it's funny because on the first one, it was like, all right, this thing could sound like absolute shit and it wouldn't matter because people are going to be so much in awe of the fact that they're watching a small wall of sound that
Yeah.
it could sound like a clock radio. And fortunately, it sounded much better than that. But it really is it's like a fully immersive experience because psychologically, when you turn all the lights off and all you see is the wall lit up,
Yeah.
you might as well be at a a 74 show and you're 50 feet back instead of 10 feet back because it all
Wow.
looks good and sounds amazing and just no people in front of it.
Now, this one is what, a quarter scale, you said?
Yeah, this is a quarter scale, which
God.
it's funny. Quarter scale, if you like when we jump up to half scale, if you really look at it in terms of speaker area, you're going up like 90%, 900% bigger with every jump up in size you do. Even though footprint may be doubling, it's really going up dramatically. Like it's just the half scale is going to be 30 feet wide by 16 feet tall, and then the vocal column will be 8 feet off the ground. So you could actually put a drummer in front of it and not have this thing behind their head.
Oh, wow. Now, where are you getting the money to do this? Are you selling them, or are you got donations, or how's this happening?
It's a little bit of everything. When I did the first one, it didn't cost a lot of money. It cost me a couple $1,000,
Oh, cool.
and I donated that one to the charity head count. And then they kind of did a dial-a-thon and called all their bigger donors. And I think the first call they made, they got $100,000 for the thing.
Wow.
Um,
And what,
so
somebody bought it and put it in their house or something?
yeah, so the person that actually bought it decided they wanted a quarter scale one instead of a 6 scale one. So they ponied up a little bit more money for the charity, and we built them a larger one. And then at the same time that this was starting to get some publicity, I had another private buyer collector from out in Arizona who purchased one. And I built a third one that's going to be me for doing special events. Like we're going to be doing an event in Long Island for a good cover band, or tribute band, Half Step. That's on the October 9th. And then we're going to be at the Capitol Theater for Phil's return. And the quarter scale wall will be set up in Garcia's for the first 3 nights.
Whoa. So,
So
so,
it's
so
yeah.
Phil is going to have it on stage,
Well, he'll be playing on the main stage at the Capitol Theater.
right?
Then at the bar area in Garcia's, they have a stage over there. So we'll
Oh,
set this up for the pre-show, in between show, after show, where we'll be playing, good 1974 stuff through it.
wow.
So, I'm glad I kept one of these for myself so I could do this kind of thing with it. And these events, when I get paid for them, allow me to fund bigger projects. So I think a lot of it's going to boil down to a combination of me funding things, private buyers funding things, and corporate sponsors and things like that. Because ultimately we're going to build a full size wall. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of how long it takes.
Wow. Now, what would a full size cost? Like you said, a mil
Yeah.
two in this day and age?
Yeah, probably about that. I mean, I've gone beyond the point where I can just have volunteers working for me on it. So it's like when I do that, I'll have I got one person that's practically full time as a volunteer. Now I'll need 4 people working full time on that. But yeah, probably going to cost $1 million. And I think the money's the easy part. I think the hard part is finding a venue that could permanently host this thing and operate it, because you're not going to take it out on the road again.
No, no.
You need an ice rink sized venue that's willing to have this as their permanent backdrop, and it's somewhat of a single purpose thing. It's meant for this kind of music. So it'll happen.
I think the greatest move ever would have it to be the permanent sound system in the Fillmore in San Francisco. That
Yeah,
would just be mind boggling to me,
yeah,
Just anytime you walk in there, you're like, oh, the wall of sound. And I think people would just buy tickets just because they're like, dude, I'm going to see it at the Fillmore. They got the wall of sound, and you know what I mean?
Or have someone rebuild it and make the Winterland just like it was. It
Ah,
needs a special purpose venue for it because it should be preserved forever. That's really the purpose of this whole thing is there's no place that's preserved the wall of sound for all these kids now that are infatuated with it that have never actually saw it. And I'm one of those. I'm
right,
52. I never saw the wall of sound.
right. Yeah, yeah. Now, when you do the full size, would it be, and I don't know on this one here, is it done on scaffolding for the look?
This one, the scaffolding is for the look and for holding the lighting rigs and things. I think the scaffolding, even at the full size, was more for the center vocal array, hoisting that up,
Right.
for the side array where Keith was, and then for all the lighting and things. And I think, I'm sure it's used for balance, but it's not supporting the weight of anything really. It's more of the infrastructure just to keep this stuff in place so it doesn't topple over.
But that gives it the look for sure.
Oh yeah.
And,
Well,
because here it was just this scaffolding. It was like Woodstock type of scaffolding, but with this, it basically looked like some rich dude's giant Macintosh home stereo. That's what it reminded me of. That's why I loved it so much. There were no grills on the speakers, no
none.
grill cloths. And that's always super cool because if it was all grill cloths, I don't think it would have the effect of the look. You
Right.
know what I mean? It wouldn't be like, wow, but without the grill cost, it's like, God, that's speaker mania up there. Now, what's above the big speakers? Are those small ones up there right above it in the
Yeah.
big
So
black part?
Yeah, so on the real wall, those would have been, those horn drivers they had at the very top.
Gotcha.
Then below it, you have these 5 or 6 inch JBLs for mid-range stuff, and then these are all would be 12-inch JBLs below or EVs. I'm not sure what the exact speakers were. These were JBLs. Those I think were EVs. I'm not sure about the main 12-inch ones in the vocal array.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, I mean, that one cabinet alone has 120, 180, 210 speakers in it. And probably I calculate it weighed about 3,500 pounds, maybe 3,200 pounds for the original, which is
Wow.
just, can you imagine being Billy and having that thing swinging over your head on a breezy day
Oh,
on scaffolding that is
I've
only,
actually seen that footage, and you're going
yeah.
like, "Whoa, man, that is crazy." That Mickey was probably glad he wasn't out on that run,
Yeah, I know Justin Kreutzmann was following along on the Instagram page, and he made a comment how his father used to be terrified of that.
Yep.
And I said, this must be like triggering if your dad would have, stop in and check out this project and be like, ah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, what amps are you using modern day, and how are you mentioned the noise canceling mics and stuff. What microphone setup and what kind of amps? Is all solid
Yeah.
state or digital amps?
All solid state. And actually, I mean, even on the original wall, all the instruments were run off solid state Macintoshes. I'm running all solid state, all Class D, primarily because they fit my budget when I started doing this.
Right.
So I'm running like two 4-channel 6,000 watt Class D amps, and so the current wall is actually broken down not into a channel for every instrument, but a channel for every speaker size. So left fours, left threes, left 1.5s, and then all around. So you still get the same effect of the original wall, where the guitar only comes through one set of speakers and the bass only comes through its own. So at this scale, it was kind of a hybrid. And mine are all at this size, they can all be full range speakers. So I can run a stereo mix into this and listen to Dead from '74. Whereas on the real wall, it really wasn't set up to play recorded music through.
Not at all. Not at
So
all.
and I think going forward, that's kind of my approach is there's got to be a way to rebuild the wall, have it look and operate the same way, but still be multi-purpose where a band other than the Dead can show up and plug into it. And I think the way I'm accomplishing that is instead of, let's say, if I'm Jerry and I'm playing with a Fender, preamp into a Mac, I can show up as any person. I can plug into a Kemper profiling rig, dial in what I do, and that rig can go right into the board, which will direct it to Jerry's speakers only. But if the next guy that wants to play it is a Marshall guy, he can show up to the Kemper, plug in his Marshall stack the way he likes it, and send that to whatever array of speakers he wants. So it'll be a little more flexible because I just need to do that so that it makes it more marketable to a venue that wants to host it.
Right, right. Now, with your setup, is there a front of house board now?
There is, but and I had this conversation with a guy who was helping me out when we did the Telefunken setup. I don't want them to mess with it. We use it to just the board is really used to route which inputs on the board go to which speaker columns, but then just level it out so we don't blow anything up. And then you leave it up to the guys on stage playing to adjust their own, interfaces for so they control their own volume, their own tone. The only thing the mixing board does is route signals to different places.
So like the original, each
Just
guy
like
dial.
just like the
Wow,
original. The only
wow.
thing really that operates like a traditional PA, and I would think that that was the same with the wall, would be the vocals, where someone's got to mix those vocals into one channel. So in that respect, yeah, I'll use the digital mixer where I can on my little iPad dial in the different mics to where we want them. And that's new. I mean, we at a quarter scale, we did it with one mic, and when we were out at Telefunken, and even in front of the stage, we weren't getting any feedback. But 10 feet in front of my wall of sound would be like 50 feet or 40 feet in front of the regular wall. So I don't know if we put a good mic 4 inches away from a quarter scale wall, you're probably going to get feedback too. So I think when we move up to half scale, that's really going to be geared towards live music. That's when I'll probably tap into guys like the guys at Telefunken, who that's what they do. They engineer this stuff. So I'll rely on them heavily to come up with a new mic system that'll kind of accomplish what we want.
Wow, wow. Did you did build some dummy type of mics that they use. Were those workable mics or just for
No,
looks?
that was the very first wall. So that was just for looks. They were literally like I glued up using balsa wood and
Right.
aluminum.
That's what you said. Yeah,
And
yeah.
then I used two humbucker screws for the mics, and from 8 feet away, it looks exactly like it.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Now, how many miles of cable do you know that the wall of sound, the original one, I mean, there had to be so much cable.
I figured out that on my quarter scale wall, I have somewhere between 400 and 600 feet of cable. So I got to imagine that they had somewhere close to a mile's worth of cable because it's infinitely more. And unlike mine, where I've got 20 speakers wired in series parallel, every one of their speakers was wired back to an amp. So, they're going to be doing long runs of cable for almost everything. I mean, the back of it, I've seen a few pictures of the back, and it's crazy what's going on. I was overwhelmed just by 600 feet of wire on that scale. So, but I believe it or not, on the bigger scale, it almost gets simpler because it's not a million wires all tumbled up together where you're
Right,
trying to untangle them. You've got things you can plug in that you don't have to solder.
right. Any contact from any of the dead guys like Bobby or anything? Like, who this for, oh, man? you know, like I mean, I could see Bobby like, yeah, let's throw it on the Dead and Co. Winter Tour. What the hell? Yeah, that'd be
Yeah, you know what?
badass.
I've heard from none of them. I mean, and I listen, they got bigger fish to fry than some guy doing this in his basement. But I would hope when we get up to the bigger scale and it's a real playable thing, I'd love to have them get to experience it again because it's really they haven't gotten to do that in 48 years or something like that. I've certainly spoken to people like Rick Turner, who's been a big support and help with some things, and like Richard Petchner, the guy who was on the road crew, gave me some great stories and things like that. So I won't say I'm doing it because I want these guys to pat me on the back or anything.
Of course.
Certainly doesn't hurt, but that time will come because the thing will certainly get big enough to a point where you can't avoid people wanting to be in front of it.
Right.
I mean,
Now, what kind of stuff was Rick throwing at you? Was he helping you with like design and stuff? Like, oh, this is what we did behind the speakers. This are the kind of boxes we were using, that kind of stuff.
yeah, and I think I talked to him mostly just about running my ideas past how you make a wall that is modern day, that's somewhat useful for multi-purpose, while still maintaining the original purpose of the wall. The wall really functioned only for the dead. They couldn't do a gig with two bands and have them just show up and plug in. But you're not going to get someone to put one of these in an arena unless they know that the band the next night can use it. So he was able to confirm some of my ideas of things that I thought would make it a healthy mix between the two. Um, and I'm sure once I start moving into the half scale wall, I'm going to tap into a lot of people a lot more than I have been.
Right.
I like to figure stuff out on my own. Maybe it's part flaw. I probably could have gotten a lot of answers a lot faster if I just asked people.
Well, I mean, that's what they did. They
Right,
just figured this. I mean, can
right.
you imagine these guys? They're taking acid and shit, and they're like, dude, how about we just make like a crazy PA, and then they kind of just draw it up. I'd like to see like just some hand napkin drawings and stuff. Like, look, it
Right.
looks like this, just like a. It's basically, it looks like a giant drum riser from the Kiss Dynasty tour. That's always
Yep.
reminded me of. But
But,
you
they were
know,
fearless about this. They when
yeah,
they had their first gig, and I don't know whether it was the first gig with the wall, like at
Cow Palace, right?
well, Maples Pavilion would be the first wall show, but not the wall as we know it now with the
Right.
the full finished wall. And then Cow Palace was the first. And the stories are that on one of those two shows, and maybe it was Cow Palace, they blew all the tweeters like on the first thing, on the first show, like the first song of the first show.
Wow.
And like I test this thing out and I know I'm pushing the limits and it's getting to the point where we're pushing 120 decibels and my ears are hurting. And all I can think is personally, if I blow all the tweeters, I don't have $5,000 because even on a small wall, like if I blow all these speakers here, that just cost me 2 grand. I don't have 2 grand to redo it. So you back it off a little bit, you know?
There's no kind of limiter on it, huh?
Uh, you know, I've since put some limiters on it, but when you're first doing this and testing it, you're like, well, the speakers say they'll handle this. The amps
Uh,
say they'll put this out. What the hell? We'll keep inching it up and see how far we go. And if I don't see the speakers really moving, I feel okay about it. But
right.
sometimes they really get moving. Like their extrusion is like a quarter inch. It's amazing.
So that's one. That's one behind you, right? Right there. That's an actual one.
So yeah, this would be what would be like Phil's stacks, or
Right.
not Phil's because they're
Well,
not the
what
JBLs,
size
but
is that one? Is that the 1/6 or the 1/4?
this is from the 1/4 wall. So
Right.
this one here would be the 1x15s for like the basses and the kick drums
Right.
and things
Right.
like
Right.
that. This would be like Jerry's stack of all 2x12. So these are 2x3s.
Right.
All these speakers are, you know, 20 to 40 watts
Right.
on for continuous. But you add in, there's 500 or so in this wall. You could really push it pretty far.
So you also build guitars, right?
Yep.
And what was your inspiration with that? Was it like Doug Irwin? Was it old school limbic and all that? Are
Yeah,
you
it's all
building that type of guitars? Do you have one of the guitars around your style and like Wolf and all that
Yeah,
stuff?
I've got I don't build replicas. I nothing against people that do, but but I'm heavily inspired by by Doug Irwin, by Alembic,
Right.
by the all my instruments are made for people that cater to people that play in Grateful Dead bands because that's my
Right.
thing.
Right. Right.
So they'll either be inspired a bit by Wolf, or I've got some stuff that's inspired by like the Travis Bean, but a lot lighter. And I it's just a market that I know, and I know that niche well, and that's so I started doing that because I wanted a new guitar, and at the time I didn't really have the money, so I built myself a Wolf, and then then you want to keep building because it's a hobby, but you can't afford to, so what do? You sell one so you can build another, and then flash forward 5 or 10 years, and now that's all you do, and it's just kind of organically grew that way.
Wow. I mean, it's a tough call for me because I absolutely love Wolf and I've seen Wolf in person and stuff, but I also love Tiger. And there's something about that Coca-Cola and
Yep.
just the body shape and all the crazy goddamn, switches on it and shit. Do you know what all those switches do? I
Oh
was
yeah.
always
Oh
wondering. I
yeah.
know I understand coil splitting and push pull pots and all that, but what was going on with that all those
Yeah.
switches?
Well, from Tiger on, pretty much, all of his guitars had what they call an obel, which is an onboard effects loop. So he would route his signal from his guitar out through a stereo cable that would go to all of his effects, go through his effects loop, come back to the guitar pre-volume. So he'd have a buffered signal, always sending the full power through his effects, and then to the volume. So it was something like a voltage sensitive effect, or something like an envelope filter, where you want to know that no matter what volume you play at, you're going to get the same attack.
Right.
You, the onboard effects loop was genius. So all of his guitars had that. That explains the two output jacks on it. It's not actually a stereo jack or anything.
Oh yeah, I
Then,
was always
yeah,
wondering on that.
yep,
Okay.
yep. So one of them is a stereo jack, but that's just to feed the send and return from the effects loop. And then the other one was just went right out to the amp. The other switches, I mean, most of his guitars were wired like a Strat. You had a single volume, two tones, one being shared for neck and bridge. And then the other switches were coil splits. and then a switch that would flip on his effects loop. So it's kind of cool because if you wanted to do, most of his playing was clean with nothing but reverb,
Right.
but you wanted to maybe cue up, I don't know, an envelope filter and a delay at the same time, you could cue them up in your effects loop, flip a switch on your guitar, and it kicks in anything that's in the effects loop that's on. So it was a quick way to switch back and forth from multiple effects to nothing.
Yeah.
Um,
Was
but
he
I think
coming up with that with Doug Irwin, or was Irwin coming up with that?
I don't think Irwin came up with that. I think, and I think this was probably more. And again, I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but I'm guessing it probably was stuff that was like, wouldn't this be a great idea? And then between him and Rick Turner and people on the crew said, hey, why don't we try this out? And
Right.
they came up with a system that would do this. But I think that was all done after Wolf was originally built.
Right.
Wolf went through several different iterations before it settled into to where it is now. But that was a common thing. I mean, really, from his latter Travis Bean all the way up through the end, he always had that effects loop going, and that three pickup setup, which he really used the middle pickup single coil for 90% of what he did anyway.
Wow. Wow.
Yep.
Wow. That's funny because I was just talking to John Mayer today,
Yep.
and I was like, "Oh, no humbucker guitar on this run. He's playing mostly his model."
Yep.
And he said, "Well, even on the humbucker one, I was always on the single coil." And it's interesting because you know you can't ever tell, like with Jerry, because he just had all the pickups going, and
Right.
single coil to me is usually that heavy strat sound or that
Right.
telly sound. So the single coil through Jerry with all the effects and everything, it was just really its own animal, whatever he
Yeah,
was pumping it through.
yeah, and even without the effects, I mean, he's pushing that through, you know, uh, a Fender preamp into a JB into a Macintosh that's pushed to the point of nearly exploding, put into two or three or four JBL E120s, pushed to the point of exploding. I mean, all these people out there trying to mimic that in a small bar. And it's you can't do it without killing people. So
No.
that's when people start adding effects in there to try to mimic that kind of
Yeah.
sound, but it's really hard to reproduce.
It's funny because when you look at Jerry's rig, it just looks like some meth head's home stereo. You know what I mean? It's like, why is that
Yeah,
Macintosh up there? And then
right,
there's like some knobs and some pieces of sheet metal with other
right.
knobs and switches. You're like, what is the rig? The great thing of John is just the beautiful sound of these dumbles, man. Like
Yeah.
he's got a few different dumbles, but man, when I saw him, I was about 3 feet away from him. I've seen Dead and Co multi times, but
Uh,
his tone is it's just impeccable. There's no ripping your head off. There's no ice picky high end. It's just
yeah.
this beautiful, warm, bubbly sound. And that's what
He's got
Jerry
his own
had.
thing going,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's good. And I know. I mean, I'm involved with this community of deadheads, and there's like a love hate relationship with that because some people, and I'll admit that for me, it's hard to let go of the past, but
Yeah.
I'd rather someone try to make it their own than do a miserable job of making it sound like it used to be.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Kreitzman was way against that also when he
yeah,
mentions a few, one particular era, in his book. He's just like, oh, just a Jerry wannabe, and he was really like almost angry about it.
yeah,
So, yeah, it is amazing what John brings to the table. And also, it would have been interesting to see what Trey would have been able to do if he played for a couple of years with the band, because he did play
yeah,
it really safe, and I understand
right,
why, because he just wanted to be respectful up there.
correct.
and
But he
and
held back definitely.
yeah, he held back for sure. He held
Yeah,
back for sure. But he is also another guy with crazy guitars that
yeah.
are custom built and all kinds of weird
Yeah,
amps and
he's
all
got
that.
his Languedocs, and that's all he plays ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And I really love guys like that are in the modern day of just searching for the great thing. There is that weird thing where you almost get too lost in it. And I've seen
Yeah,
guys do that. New amp every gig, new
yeah,
guitar every gig. They're never finding the sound, or I think it could be better. And they're more lost in the equipment than actually playing the music.
right.
And that's where
Uh,
you really suffer.
And my view is that, listen, I make guitars for a living. So obviously it's in my best interest to say that I can make the guitar that's going to make you sound like Jerry. But the reality is that, I'm you spend 3 grand or more on the right guitar and you play the right way, you can sound really good. Beyond that, I think you're really buying a piece of artwork that inspires you to play better. If playing in front of a wall of sound is going to make you sound better because you feel inspired, then it was worth every penny.
Yep.
So, I guys that and gals that just want to go out and buy new gear, nothing wrong with that at all. That's what
No.
brings them joy.
Yeah, totally.
So I mean,
Totally.
I
I've been
trust
there.
me, I'm a,
Yeah.
I'm a hack of a player. I mean, I play okay, and I
Yeah.
love my really nice gear, but it doesn't mean I'm going to show up for an open jam anytime soon and and feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I'll have a nice looking guitar though.
Now, where are you at again? What city you in?
I'm in Southbury, Connecticut, so kind of northwestern or sorry, southwestern Connecticut.
Oh, I was just up
Yeah.
there at what's the casino? Just did it. The
Oh, you were
big,
in southeastern. I'm in
yeah.
southwestern. So you were up at Foxwoods or
Yeah, I was
Mohegan
at
Sun. Yeah,
Foxwoods. Yeah, I was at
we
Foxwoods.
go there for comedy. We saw Bill the Burr there.
I was on that show. I was just there.
Oh, this was goes back a few years because
Oh,
we're
we just did it last Saturday.
oh
Hilarious.
cool. One of my absolute favorites. So
Oh, right
next
on.
time.
Do you have a guitar laying around that maybe we can see?
Yeah, let me. I'm taking my headset off
Yeah,
for
yeah.
2 seconds.
Cool.
Just
Oh, wow. Cool.
so this would be kind of my. I don't know, can you hear me all right?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, this would be kind of my take on a Wolf, or this is an older guitar, so my newer ones are a bit more updated, but same setup as Tiger. It's got the same single coil, two DiMarzio Super Twos, single volume, two tone, split coils. It's got the oboe output jack and your oboe on off,
Wow.
regular 5-ray Strat selector. So this is kind of my standard
And what are you
Very
using
covered.
there? Sandwiched of maple and walnut or something?
This one's lacewood, maple and walnut. Yeah, I don't know if you can really get a sense for it on
Yeah.
there, but
Yeah, you can see that. It's
um,
great. Great.
and then I
neck to the
got
body.
and one of my newer guitars that I love making. This is my kind of take on the Travis Bean.
Oh, wow. Is that
So same.
P90s?
Nope, these are actually custom wound single coils. They look like P90s shape wise, but these are
Wow.
really meant to copy the original Travis Bean, the TB500 pickups that Jerry had.
Wow.
But again, real similar setup. Only these pickups all have separate switches, so you can choose any combination or all, or you can do a bridge neck if you want. Same oboe though, same oboe on off, same volume tone setup. But my take on the Bean is I always love the white guitar and it's just beautiful. But this weighs 7 pounds versus 14 pounds because no aluminum neck. This is all Carina or Limba.
Wow. That's
So,
beautiful on the back there. Wow. Really nice. It's cool. It's
but again,
painted white on the front.
it's got enough cues to the originals where I feel good about it, but I don't like copying anybody. It's just not my gig.
Wow.
So,
What do those run?
they start at about 5 grand and can go up from there depending on what you want to do. I mean,
Those are
I
beautiful.
kind of try to stay in the middle of some of the bigger guys out there and the lower ones out there.
Yeah. 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 That's great, man. That's great.
I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of been a hobby that turned into a real business a few years back, and I love doing it.
What'd you do before this? Were you like, what kind of job did you have before this?
Oh, I've taken like the typical reverse career path. I started out like doing more business type stuff, and then left that and got into construction because I wanted to be more artistic and hands on because I was an art major originally, and then after that said, construction isn't really creative enough for me. So then the guitar business took off. And I'm like, now I'm working my way backwards to where I where I should have started.
That's beautiful, man. What's the name of the company again?
Coscia Guitars.
Coscia Guitars, and
Yeah.
spell that for people on
It's
Instagram.
sure. It's COSCIA.
COSCIA.
Yep. So Coscia Guitars is on Facebook and Instagram. I don't even have a website. I have no free time anymore to do anything. It's ridiculous.
That seems to be everybody's story, that especially since COVID, that I've had on the show, people that build boots, people that build leather saddlebags and seats for motorcycles,
Yep.
and people that build guitars and amps and stuff. What happens is they achieve their dream, and then this wait list happens, and it's like,
Yep.
oh my God, I've got like 3 years of work here.
Yeah.
And
And
it
listen,
is,
I don't take for granted a minute, and I don't know how you feel about this doing what you do, but COVID happens and demand for things that inspire creativity skyrockets because
yeah,
people have nothing else to do. So, I mean, I'm very fortunate that worked in my benefit because I got to work through all this, with the exception of the first couple months where I couldn't get vendors to get me supplies. But it's been good for business, and it's been great for people who are creative but never had the time to really explore it, and now are going crazy. They got tons to do.
yeah.
And now the live music scene's kind of back, and like the number of gigs happening left and right is fantastic.
I know. You got a favorite Dead song? I know it's impossible.
No, mine
Mine the
was
last
always
two. My
Scarlet Begonias.
Oh yeah. I go Terrapin Station the last
Yep.
couple years.
I think for me it was Scarlet because it was the first song that really hooked me. And it is, probably because everyone who gets introduced to the Dead probably hears Barton Hall like in the first 2 days of their introduction. But I always loved it, and I always loved in particular the Wall era, '74, where it was short and sweet and faster and really syncopated and everything. I love that stuff.
Yeah, I wonder if they're going to they've got the nickname Dead and Slow, of course. And Bobby has said, I like to hear the notes in between the notes, and but I'm really hoping on the next run that they go to the normal tempos, or even speed it up a little, just to for ticket buyers to be like, oh my God, they're playing crazy tempos and stuff. This is
Right.
just for a whole different thing.
Yeah.
I think it'd be
Yeah.
cool. And that's what the Dead did. They
Yep.
sounded different on every tour. One drummer, two
Yeah.
drummers, Donna's there, Donna's not there, different keyboard players,
Yeah.
different, jams.
Who am I to judge how they play, how fast they play? I mean,
I
I
don't,
like it more up tempo, and certainly it's a popular topic of discussion is why is it so slow? But
yeah,
I'm not in their shoes. I don't know what they're feeling, but if
I'm
they
not
if
either.
they played faster, people would love it. But it's listen, it's their band. They get to do what they want. They don't have to mimic anybody else.
Oh yeah, it doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, why are you at the concert complaining? Just don't
Right.
buy the ticket and stay home and watch some YouTube videos. You'll be fine. What
That's
are you
it.
doing here? But I
I'll
will
tell
tell
you.
you this: I want
Yep.
estimated profit to be fast. Come on,
Yeah.
that is a bum bum bum, but bum bum
Yep.
bum.
What I love though is that we've got like the number of ridiculously talented musicians that will never make it beyond their local regional kind of dead band. There's so many, and I almost get more pleasure now as a 50-plus-year-old like going out to a local music place, whether it's Garcia's or something like that, and seeing a really good talented group of people play, and then I'm home in bed by midnight.
And you spent $12.
Yeah, spent $20 instead of
Yeah,
$150. But
yeah.
just it's I like supporting those people because those are the people that are supporting me.
Yep.
And if that's what's keeping this type of music alive, is that the fact that so many people are out there playing it and continuing it.
Well, I'm glad I found it late in life, because I grew up in San Francisco Bay Area, and I
Yep.
couldn't stand them,
Sure.
and because it was just all over my face. And then I realized it was mostly the fans that were bumming me out, not the band.
That's
Eh,
a lot of people in the late '80s who are deadheads probably felt the same way.
yeah,
Just
yeah. Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show. You are a perfect guest for this podcast. I love people that work outside the box, that have found their dream and enjoy what they're doing every day, because that's what I do. I do stand-up comedy and I
yeah.
podcast, and I talk to people like you, and I get excited, man. I really do. I just love somebody that is in Connecticut making a version of the Wall. And then immediately I was like, well, I got to talk to that guy right away. I mean, that kind of shit is cool as hell. And especially in the world of everybody on their phones and computers, it's like, nah,
Yeah.
look at this over here, you know. And I hope to see that thing in a venue one day and hear it, and maybe the Cow Palace, you know, something
Yeah.
to be
Well,
rad.
the day will come, but in the short term, come out to Garcia's in a month. Come out and you can see it there and see Phil at the same time.
That's going to be great. Well, thank you for
Yeah.
doing the show. And once
Thank
again,
you.
give everybody the Instagram for the mini wall of sound. It's mini underscore, right?
Yeah. Mini underscore wall of underscore sound. Mini
Right.
wall sound. And then on Facebook, petite mur de son.
Man, that's great, man. And God, if you get a cool pro photo of that, send me one. I mean, I got some off your Instagram, but I just love looking at it. It's
Oh,
very
I
cool.
absolutely will. We're going to
Thank,
start having some setups, so we'll do it.
thank you so much for doing the show, man.
Thank you, man. This was great.
Yeah, have a great weekend.
All right. You too. Take care.
See you, brother.